In this video, we're going to investigate Skill 2, Explicit Graph Reading. In Skill 2, Explicit Graph Reading, we will focus on reading numbers and information directly from graphs. When doing this, it's important to ask ourselves a series of questions, like what is the scale of this data, and what do the x and y axes tell me? So let's first look at this graph. This graph is talking about the number of Americans who are willing or unwilling to get the COVID-19 vaccine. So we need to look at this and see that there are percentages for each of these categories and that there are different parameters like all Americans, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, and then age groups. So we first need to look at this question. It says, what percent of Americans are willing to get a COVID vaccine? So to be able to answer this question, I first need to look at this graph key. So it says yes is the blue and no is red. And this says are willing. So I know I'm going to be looking at the yes category, which is blue. And it says what percentage of all Americans? Well, here's all Americans. I'm looking at the blue line and I see that the answer is 65%. Wonderful. The next question says, what percent of Democrats are not willing to get the vaccine? Well, I know since I see the word not, that means the word no. So I'm going to be looking for the red bar. Next, I know I'm going to be looking for Democrats. So here I found Democrats, and I need to look at this red bar, which is 19%. So 19% of Democrats are not willing to get the COVID-19 vaccine. Last but not least, this question says, what percent of 50 to 64-year-olds are willing to get the COVID-19 vaccine? Well, since it says willing, I know that means yes, which means I'm looking for the blue group of people who are 50 to 64 years old. So I'm going to be looking for blue and for this age group. I see this age group right here, 50 to 64 years old. And I'm looking at this blue number because they're willing to get the vaccine. So I know that this answer is 59%. Next, I'm going to look at this graph. The title of this graph is Hours Spent Playing Video Games per Week by Age Group. So I know that this is going to look at the number of hours that individuals spend playing video games based on their age. And I do see that there is a key. One says 2018 and one says 2019. So I know that the year is going to be very important, and I'm going to want to pay attention to that as I answer these questions. The first question says, how many hours of video games did people who were 26 to 35 play in 2019? Well, first, since it's 2019, I know I'm going to pay attention to this red bar. And then I'm going to look for the age group, which is 26 to 35-year-olds. So here's my 26 to 35-year-olds, and I'm looking for that red bar because it's 2019, and I see it's 8.21 hours. Be sure that you always include a unit in things like this. Next, the question says, what group of people played 5.63 hours in 2019? Since it's 2019, remember I'm looking only at those red numbers. So I see that this red number is 7.78. That's no good. 8.21, no good. 7.76, not what I'm looking for. 6.32, not what I'm looking for. Oh, look, 5.63 hours in 2019 is individuals who are older than 60. That's what the 60 plus means. This graph looks a little bit different than the graphs we've seen before, but this graph shows where employees have the most and least paid holidays. We can see over here that our scale tells us, or our key tells us, that blue countries are ones where there are more vacation days per year, and red countries are where there are less vacation days per year. So it says, what country has the most number of paid vacation? Well, I know I'm going to be looking for which one, blue or red numbers. Hopefully you said to yourself, blue. So I'm going to look at these blue numbers. I see 32.3, 32.0, 33.3, 32.0, 37, and 30. And that 37 is in the country of Saudi Arabia. So I'm going to write Saudi Arabia here. Wonderful. The next question asks us, which city has an average of 10.1 days? So I'd already looked at all the blue days, and I saw that there were no numbers that were 10.1. So now I'm going to look at my other numbers. I see 9.7, 8.0, 10.4, 6.1, 14.4, and oh my goodness, only 10.1 days, which is almost the least number of days, not quite because of China and Vietnam, but almost the least number of days takes place in the United States of America. Let's look at another example together. In this example, we're looking at the amount of money that was spent on Halloween in the United States. We can see on the x-axis, we have our year. Remember, this is the independent variable. We can see on our y-axis, we have the amount of money spent in billions of dollars. And so we know that this is our dependent variable. And this question says, what year did people in the United States spend the most amount of money on Halloween? So I want to look for the highest point on this graph, and that highest point is right here. And if I go down, I can see that occurred in 2016. The next question says, how much money did people in the United States spend on Halloween in 2006? And so here I look at 2006, and I see that it says 5. But remember, it's not just $5. It is $5 billion because this says in billions of dollars. So I'm going to write $5 billion. Wonderful. You could also write that number totally out, and it would look like this. That's how much money was spent in the United States on Halloween decorations in 2006. And we're going to look at this graph last. This graph compares daily trips in different vehicles in New York City. The yellow taxi, an Uber, or a Lyft. And we can see down here our key is very important. Our yellow taxi has a yellow line, Uber is black, and Lyft is pink. So let's use this information to determine the answers to these questions. The first question says, from September 2015 to January 2016, which was the least popular car service in New York City? Well, we know that this y-axis here is the number of trips per day. So we're going to look to see which service had the least number of trips per day. And the answer here is Lyft. I know that because this line right here is the lowest of all of the lines. Next, it says approximately how many trips per day did yellow taxis in New York City take in September 2016? So I want to find September 2016, which is right here. And I'm going to draw up my graph until I find where it says yellow taxis. And I can see that that yellow taxi line is just above the 300,000 mark. So I'm going to say about 300,000. Wonderful. And now I'm going to look at my very last question. It says, what car service provided more than 100,000 trips per day between January 2016 and May 2016? So I'm going to look at this graph and I'm going to see which car services provided more than 100,000 rides. So here's my 100,000 mark, and I'm just going to draw a line, and I know that anything above this line will answer that question. So I'm going to look from January 2016 until May 2016. So what was above that line during that time? Well, I see that the yellow line was, and the black line was, and that yellow line is yellow taxis, and the black line is Uber. So I have two answers here, yellow taxis and Uber. Hopefully this video helped improve your explicit graph reading skills. Remember, explicit graph reading skills involves you viewing a graph and being able to take information directly from that graph.